Today, we settle all debates on the top Jets offensive players of the 21st century. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, July 14th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Our episode today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Over the next 2 days, we will have special editions of Locked On Jets. My friend MacGregor Wells, who writes with me at GangGreenNation.com, will join us, and he and I will give you our all Jets quarter-century teams. We are now through 25 of the 100 NFL seasons in the 21st century, so we're going to look back at the last 25 years of Jets football and name the best players. You know, it's been a rough go of things for Jets fans in recent years. It's good to remember that we've had some very memorable players who have produced great contributions to the team. On today's show, MacGregor and I will give you our all Jets quarter-century team on offense. So let's jump right into it. We are now a quarter of the way through the 21st century in the NFL. So on today's show, we are going to unveil the all quarter-century team for the New York Jets. Joining me is my friend MacGregor Wells, who writes with me at GangGreenNation.com. And we've both come up with lists for the all quarter century first team and the all quarter century second team. So MacGregor, thanks for joining me today. You'll be the voice of the audience. You'll be the one that explains to everybody why my picks are terrible.
Thanks for having me, John.
Okay, so let's start at quarterback. I think for quarterback, the first team is easy and the second team is difficult for the same reason, is that I really think there's only been one good Jets quarterback in the 21st century. So why don't you start? Give us your first team Jets quarterback.
It's got to be Chad Pennington. But even Chad, he had one great year and then a bunch of sort of okay years with intermittent injuries. So he didn't get a ton from Chad, but one great year was spectacular.
Yeah, I actually think like Pennington, like people forget how good he was before he got hurt. I mean, he had I actually looked this up. So he took over as the starting quarterback in week 5 of 2002. He suffered his first injury in I think it was week 8 of 2004. And if you look at his efficiency numbers during that stretch, his completion percentage, his passer rating, and his yards per attempts, it was actually like almost identical statistically to Peyton Manning during that 2-year stretch. The problem is he suffered that injury in 2004. And then he came back the next year, suffered another injury. But I really think the Jets could have won a Super Bowl with Pennington if he had stayed healthy, because like even when he came back, like you could tell like his arm was pretty much gone. He really couldn't throw any, but he was still effective. I mean, even when the Jets got rid of him, he went to Miami. He was second in the MVP voting in 2008. I mean, that shows you how good he was, that he could still play even like with his arm hanging by a thread. You know, for me, that's like the all-time Jets what if. But I still think those 2 years were really. I think it was more than 1 year. I think he had there was a 2-year stretch over 3 seasons where he was playing really like top level football.
Yeah, he was outstanding, but unfortunately, he didn't last long.
Okay, so let's go to the second team quarterback, because this one was really hard for me, and I eventually settled on one guy because it was like the only good Jets quarterback season in the 21st century that was a non-Pennington year. That was the guy I settled on. Who did you go with?
I got Mark Sanchez. I don't think he's a good quarterback, but there was very little to choose from. And one of the things I went with this exercise was you had to be there for a while. 3 seasons minimum of actually playing, for the Jets and playing actually, not just a few games, but a full season. And there just wasn't much to choose from. So you could have argued for, Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he only really played 1 season, and his second season was terrible. So I went with Mark Sanchez.
So this is interesting because I did not have that rule. And there are some like 1 season guys I went with. For me, it was like a combination of guys who were good for a couple of years and guys who were maybe great for 1 or 2 years. Sanchez is like it's always difficult to like figure out like where he fits in Jets lore, because he was never that good, but the team still won games. He had some good moments in like big spots. I mean, he had some playoff games where he played very well during those first 2 years with Rex Ryan. So yeah, Sanchez has a very interesting place in Jets lore. So I did not go with your rule that you had to be here 3 years. My second team quarterback was Ryan Fitzpatrick because I couldn't figure out, like, he was the only, his 2015 season was really the only good Jets quarterback season I could come up with, like, outside of Pennington. Like, I thought about Vinny, but, Vinny Testaverde had the great if the 98 season happened in the 21st century, the second team would be Vinny Testaverde, but he suffered the Achilles injury in 99. In 2000, he led the league in interceptions. 01, they made the playoffs, but, he was very shaky. He was a bad fit for Paul Hackett's system, and I hate that, like, now I have to specify which terrible Hackett offensive coordinator I talk about when I mention the Jets. Where else do you go? It's like Josh McCown was okay in 2017, but I don't think he was as good as Fitzpatrick's in 2015. I mean, I'm not going with Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre. I know there are some people out there that think they had good seasons. So I settled on Fitzpatrick, and like I know like most of his success was probably just the fact he had Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker to throw to, but. Yeah, I felt like he was a good fit for Chan Gailey's offense that year. They spread he was a good guy making pre-snap reads against spread for when they spread the field. I felt like, it was mostly Marshall, but he developed good chemistry with Marshall through that season. So even though the second year was bad, like I felt like I had to go with Fitzpatrick. So that was my pick for the number 2 quarterback.
Yeah, there's no question about it. He had a great year that year, but it was 1 year. I just couldn't do it for 1 year. This is across the board, so you'll find differences between you and I in various.
Oh, you're gonna hate some of my picks now. Now you're gonna like. I bet you like a lot of the audience will agree with you. So this will be you could be the voice of the audience telling me why I'm wrong on everything. So we'll move to running back, and at running back we did 2 first-teamers and 2 second-teamers, and I tried to like do a combination of like the way the AP does it with the Pro Football Writers Association. It's almost like there should be 3 levels because it's like. Obviously, like Curtis Martin's going to be on everybody's first team, and he's one of the greatest players of all time. And a guy who, like, I was thinking this through before we started recording, like the rare, like, great athlete who played in New York yet flew under the radar. I think part of it was just he was very low key personality, but part of it was his game like didn't really jump out at you. He wasn't a guy with blazing speed. He wasn't the guy who like ran over defenders. I always thought like what he was maybe the best ever at was. He was like so good at like when there was nothing there, he'd find like some like small crease between the left guard and the left tackle, and he'd turn what should be a 1 yard gain into a 5 yard gain. And over the course of the season, that adds up. And you're never like overwhelmed watching him. But then you get to December, it's like, gee, Curtis Martin's running for 1,200 yards again.
Yeah, he was an amount of consistency, and he just never. I mean, he was a quiet guy, so he didn't get auto recognition. He was never the best running back in the NFL. But he was always one of the best for years and years and years. But Curtis Martin, there's no question about him.
A class act, and a guy who never missed a game. I mean, he played through some incredibly painful injuries, and you never heard about it. I mean, we could go on. I mean, we could fill up a week's worth of episodes just talking about how great Curtis Martin was. But I felt like we needed to spend a decent amount of time talking about him. So so for the rest of my like running back list, this was really tough. My second spot on the first team all quarter century team went to Thomas Jones, and I struggled with this because like at the time I felt like a lot of Thomas Jones' success was that he had the best offensive line in the league, but then I thought it through, and he was a 1,000-yard rusher 3 times with the Jets, and we've seen not just with the Jets across the NFL, there are backs who, even though if the offensive line blocks something for them, they don't always get all the yardage. Thomas Jones always got the yardage that was blocked for him. A model of consistency. He was always healthy. So he was the guy I ultimately went with on my second slot on the first team. Who was your second guy on the first team?
Yeah, I agree with you, Thomas Jones. He averaged almost 1,300 yards a year with the Jets. He did a really nice job for the first 3 or 4 years, I think it was. He was on one of the really good Jets teams. That always it gives you a little bit of a boost, in my opinion, if you're on a really successful team. So, yeah, Thomas Jones, absolutely.
Okay, so now we have 2 slots for the second team, and I had 4 guys for 2 slots. The 4 guys I considered were Chris Ivory, Breece Hall, Bilal Powell, and Sean Green. And ultimately, I went with Ivory and Hall. I love Bilal Powell. He's one of my favorite players, but I couldn't go with him because he was never the number one back on his own team. And I feel like there are certain spots where you don't need to be the number one guy on the team to make the all quarter century team. But I feel like running back is one of those spots. And ultimately, I went with Ivory and Hall just because I felt like on their best day, they were better than Sean Green on their best day. I mean, Sean Green looked like he had a lot of potential as a rookie, especially near the end of that year. He really had a great playoffs in 2009. But after that, I felt like he was kind of disappointing. And, I was also thinking this through is like, not that I wasn't trying to design a team where everybody complements each other, but Chris Ivory and Breece Hall would have been a great pair, where Ivory's the hammer and then Breece Hall's kind of like the speed guy. Both of them had multiple quality seasons with the Jets. I mean, Ivory was like one of the most fun players to watch because of how physically I actually worry about Chris Ivory now because of how, like, what a pounding he took during his career, but really fun guy to watch, a guy who was just impossible to bring down. And Breece Hall, who, we'll see, Breece Hall, who's the story's not written on him yet, but has had a couple really promising years with the Jets. So those were my two picks for the second team running back. Who were your second team running backs?
The exact opposite. I had Sean Green and Bilal Powell. Breece Hall was out just because he only had 2.5 years. 1 year was 7 games. So he just wasn't in consideration for me. He's a really good back. I have no problem with it. You picking him, he just didn't meet my qualifications. As far as Chris Ivory was concerned, he was a liability in the passing game. That hurt him for me. And Bilal Powell was just really good at everything. He wasn't great at anything, but he was really and had a real long Jets career, 9 years. And every year he was just absolutely consistent. Every year I felt like they're playing guys who are worse than him, and I don't understand why. And Sean Green, I gave him credit for 2,000-yard seasons. So, I went with Sean Green and Bilal Powell.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. Sean Green is like, I think it was tough for me because like there were 4 guys in the mix for this, and I think like you didn't like go off the radar. You didn't pick like Matt Forte or somebody. I think that there was a fair argument for like 4 guys for those 2 spots. So I think we got them all covered. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging in early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. But it's not just concert tickets Game Time sells. You can also go to sports, Yankees and Mets baseball. And, you may be thinking forward to the upcoming Jets season. You may be hearing MacGregor and I talk about great Jets players of the past. Maybe you're thinking, gee, I wish I got to see them in person. Well, see the next great Jets players in person. Game Time's the best place to get your tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets and sports tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's go fullback now. So who was your first team fullback?
Richie Anderson. Richie Anderson was great in the passing game. He wasn't this classic bone-crunching blocker, but he did well at blocking. But he was one of the few guys in Jets history that was just a real weapon in the passing game. So I went with Richie Anderson.
He had 88 catches in 2000. I mean, that was that's like a ahead of his time type of thing. A fullback catching 88 balls. I mean, that's the type of thing that doesn't, like, even like with the increased uses of running backs in the passing game today, like there's no fullback that catches 88 balls. So yeah, I also went with Richie Anderson as my first team guy, and that was the real difference. It was that he was a great, not only was a great weapon in the passing game, he was a great weapon in the passing game in an era where, it's not like this was today's game. That was a really like modern concept the Jets had in 2000 with Richie Anderson. Was I think he was their leading receiver that year. It was an unbelievable year. Who was your second team full? So I think for the second team there were 2 good choices, but I'm interested which of the 2 you chose.
I chose Gerald Soule. He had a long career with the Jets, and he was just solid all around. He also had some production in the passing game. He wasn't just a blocker, so I like Gerald Soule.
Those were so I did the opposite. So it was between 2 guys for me. It was between Gerald Soule and Tony Richardson. I went with Tony Richardson, and a lot of it had to do with maybe I don't know if this is fair, but a lot of it was intangibles because everybody who was around those Rex teams in 2008, 2009 said he was like one of the biggest leaders in the locker room. He wasn't quite as good of a receiver as Soul, but he was an excellent lead blocker. It was really close for me between Tony Richardson and Soul for that second spot, but I ultimately went with Richardson. So we're covering all the bases. We're covering like everybody. I think like you're getting all of my last cuts, and I'm getting all of your last cuts. So I like that we're recognizing all these great Jets players. So let's move on now to the wide receiver position. I think of all these teams, I'm going to have the most controversial pick at the wide receiver spot. So I think what we decided to do were 3 first teamers and 3 second teamers. Yeah. And this is interesting because I think that there are 2 absolute slam dunk first teamers, and the third spot is kind of open for debate. So I'll start off. I'll give you my first teamers. So I think the 2 guys who are slam dunks are Laveranues Coles and Garrett Wilson. Both of whom multiple 1,000-yard seasons. Coles was a real weapon. He had great chemistry with Chad Pennington. In fact, I think Chad Pennington named his son Cole after Laveranues Coles. So those guys were really close off the field. They're great chemistry on the field, great chemistry off the field. Garrett Wilson, 3 seasons, 3,000-yard years. This one is going to completely violate your it has to be at least 3 years rule, because this guy really only had 1 year with the Jets, but this year was so good. It was like so above anything else I've ever seen a Jets receiver do. And what it came down to for me was, would I rather have this 1 year, or would I rather have like multiple years of that weren't quite as good? So this is good. I think like a lot of people are going to disagree with it. My third guy on the first team is Brandon Marshall. And I know it was a very short term, but it was so spectacular that like I felt like it overrode everything else.
Yeah, you can't argue with Brandon Marshall unless you have a longevity rule. Brandon Marshall had an unbelievable season that 1 year, so I got no problem with it. I wasn't even considering him.
Okay. So who were your 3 first teamers?
You got the first 2, and Jericho Cotchery was my third.
Yeah, Cotchery is an excellent, a heck of a Jet, and I think when everybody thinks about Cotchery, they think about that play in Cleveland in 2010 where he pulled up lame. I think it was his groin he injured, and like he was just kind of hobbling around, and then Mark Sanchez extended the play, and Cotchery just kind of broke and made this diving catch. I mean, a guy who was just a really solid player through much of his Jets career, and one of the toughest players you'll ever see.
Never seen a play like that before. That was I couldn't read that play.
Ever since, I mean, it's like you have to go like if you weren't a Jets fan in 2010, like pause this, go onto YouTube and watch that play where he's literally like injured. He can't move. And then somehow like he sees he has a chance to make a play and he just breaks, even though he's injured, he can't move. He makes a diving catch. It was one of the most incredible plays you'll ever see. Just true heart. All right. So my second team, I had 4 guys I was considering for 3 spots. And I'm surprised with where I went on this, because initially I thought I was going to go in a different direction. But then after I considered things, I decided to go the way that I went. So I had Cotchery was my second teamer. He was a guy who was a great Jet, just a really gutty player. My second spot I went, this one might be a bit of a surprise. I went with Eric Decker, who had 2 very good seasons. He had a season where he almost got 1,000 yards, and he was part of that 2015 passing game. He went over 1,000 yards. He part of the great duo with Brandon Marshall. So Decker was my second guy. My third guy was Wayne Chrebet. And when I started this, I thought Chrebet would not make my team because most of Chrebet's prime was in the 1990s. But then I looked at it, and the guy who I dropped was Robbie Anderson. And I thought I was going to go Anderson, but then like I compared their numbers, and like both of them had like one good year, 2 years that were pretty good. But then like Chrebet also, like even after his prime, he was a guy who was really reliable. Like even when he wasn't producing much on 3rd and 5, you could go to him and he'd move the chains in a way that wasn't true with Anderson. So I gave my third spot to Chrebet. Who were your 3 second teamers?
I got Chrebet. I got Robbie Anderson, and I got Santana Moss.
Santana Moss. That's the Santana Moss Laveranues Coles thing will drive me crazy to no end, because Terry Bradway, this is going to be an ongoing theme with some of my picks. Terry Bradway let a lot of really good players leave the Jets, and Laveranues. So after the 2002 season, which was Chad Pennington's breakout season, Coles had emerged as the number 1 receiver. Terry Bradway let Coles go to Washington. Jets ended up getting him back 2 years later in a trade, but they had to trade Santana Moss. And it will always frustrate me that like we didn't have this trio of Coles, Moss, and Cotchery. We could have had them for 5 years, and Terry Bradway messed that up. And Santana Moss's best season was 2003, where he went over 1,000 yards with the Jets, and then they traded him to Washington, and he ended up being a second-team All-Pro that year. The Moss leaving will always be one of my regrets. I actually have Moss on my team later on when we get to special teams. But yeah, he was a speedster. I really like Santana Moss. So let's move now to tight end. I think that we're both going to have the same first teamer because, like quarterback, I think there's only been one actually good Jets tight end in the 21st century. And then there were a couple of guys who were okay who I considered for the second team. So you go ahead. Your first team tight end?
It's Dustin Keller. He was a difference maker for a little while, but he had a very short career. But for 4 years, he was very good at tight end. He wasn't much of a blocker. If you wanted for him inline role, he didn't really do that well. But as a receiver, he's definitely the best Jets tight end in the last 25 years.
Yeah, he was. And it's like you said. And I think for me, like I give bonus points when you were on like one of the good teams, particularly the Rex teams. I mean, he was a guy who made a difference. And those teams, like especially the 2010 team, and they had receiving threats all over the place. They had Braylon Edwards, they had Santonio Holmes, the good version of Santonio Holmes with the Jets, and Cotchery, and then Dustin Keller. I mean, Mark Sanchez wasn't great, but they were able to get by, and I think a big part of the reason was they had weapons like that, and Keller was certainly among them. And it's unfortunate his prime didn't last longer, but he really solid player, and like I said, I think he was the one above average tight end the Jets had in the 21st century. Who was your second team tight end?
It's Tyler Conklin. He's nothing special, but when you went through the list of tight ends, the Jets just didn't have anything at that position. So Tyler Conklin did a solid job for the last 3 years. So I went with him.
So I considered two guys, and Conklin was one of them, but I went with the other one. The one I went with, so I considered the last Jets tight end of the quarter century and the first Jets tight end of the quarter century. I ended up going with the first Jets tight end of the quarter century, which was Anthony Becht. And my rationale was this: it was Becht versus Conklin. Conklin was a better receiver than Becht, but I felt the gap between Conklin and Becht's receiving wasn't as big as the gap between the blocking of Becht versus the blocking of Conklin. Like Conklin was a better receiver, but Becht was a better blocker by more. And Becht was part of that fabled 2000 Jets draft class where they drafted Pennington and they drafted Sean Ellis and John Abraham, and then in the third round they got Laveranues Coles. And I think like part of like the narrative with Becht is he's remembered very fondly. I think part of that is he was in a draft where they just had 3 other first round picks and they got Coles in the third round, because I think like in a normal year where you get a drafted tight end as your first round pick and he's like a 300-yard a year guy, you're not really that happy with. But with Anthony Becht's like your 5th best player from your draft class, you've done a great job. So it was, again, that was another one that was razor thin, but I went with Becht over Conklin. So again, we're honoring all these Jets players who were effective through the years.
Yeah, just barely effective at tight end.
It's funny. Yeah, so that's the other funny thing is like he's very fondly treated now in the Jets fan base. But when he was here, he was not a very popular player. Like people couldn't wait to get rid of him. But
he was hated.
Yeah, and it's funny because now he's look back, he's like, oh, he's part of the 2000 draft class. Oh, that was part of that great class. He's also now, I think he's now part of the Jets radio team. I think he just replaced Marty Lyons as the radio analyst this year, and he's also a coach in the UFL. So very interesting career path he's taken. But now let's move to the offensive line. So we're doing each position on the offensive line. Left tackle. The first team's obviously D'Brickashaw Ferguson. I'm sure that's who you picked, right?
No question. Yeah, no question. He was a star for years.
10-year guy who missed one snap, and the only reason he missed the snap was a trick play, which I actually would argue the trick play was pretty smart. It was like one of those desperation plays where Jets it was like the end of a game where they were losing and they threw a bunch of laterals. And I always think those plays end when like an offensive lineman got the ball. So with the Jets stuck Darrelle Revis at left tackle because they knew he was eventually going to go lateral. I mean, play didn't work, but I actually thought that was a smart move. Unfortunately, it was like it was the one blemish where like he played every snap of his career except that one. But excellent player. Truly a successful pick. I always say that like this is one of my dumbest, and I shouldn't say this because it was before like my website or before this podcast, so I could deny it. But one of my dumbest pieces of analysis, I was really upset when the Jets picked him because they didn't pick Matt Leinart, who ended up being a total bust at quarterback, and D'Brickashaw ended up being a 10-year starter who at his best was one of the best tackles in the league, and class act. And also like if you haven't been following D'Brickashaw's path, there was a recent article that came out that he started a second career. He was going into nursing, and I just think that's really admirable. This is a guy who made so much money he could do anything, and he decided to go back to school and contribute and help people in the medical field. So really class guy, class player. I can't say enough good things about D'Brickashaw.
Really smart and articulate too. I always thought he would make a great announcer, but I guess he was interested in going to the medical field, so it's great for him.
Yeah. Okay. Who was your second team left tackle?
Jason Fabini. He actually switched right tackle, left tackle. So I was like, do I really want to put him there? But I didn't have a lot of other great options at left tackle. So yeah, Jason Fabini was just a solid guy for many years for the Jets.
Yeah, the Jets were very lucky at the left tackle position because they went from Fabini to D'Brickashaw. The only other guy I thought could even be in the ballpark was Calvin Beachum, but Fabini was better than him. So yeah, I went the same route. I had Fabini as my second team left tackle. All right, let's talk left guard. So this is a guy who may not meet your longevity criteria, but my first teamer was Alan Faneca. He's a Hall of Famer. His prime was in Pittsburgh, but the Jets signed him in 2008. He was a part of that great offensive line in 2009 that took the Jets to the AFC Championship game. And even though he was kind of on the downswing of his career, he was still very effective. Still made the Pro Bowl a couple of times with the Jets. So I felt like he was like the best left guard of the 21st century to date. Who's your first teamer?
Yeah, Alan Faneca is the best left guard for the 21st century. But again, I was like 3 years cut off. So I went with Pete Kendall. He was solid for 3 years, but he was nothing that spectacular.
Well, he was a guy who stabilized the Jets' offensive line in 2004. They was actually a camp signing, and he was. So I'll go into the second team. Pete Kendall was my second team left guard, and the Jets got him. He got cut by Arizona in training camp in 2004. He came in and stabilized the offensive line on the Jets team that went to the playoffs. He was there for 3 years, and then 2007, the dumbest thing Eric Mangini did. Kendall wanted a raise of $1 million, and Mangini just dug his heels in, and they ended up trading him to Washington. And they ended up having Adrian Clark, who to this date is the worst offensive lineman I've ever. If we did it like an all terrible team, Adrian Clark would be my starting left guard because I've never seen an offensive lineman as bad as I've seen. I've seen guys like Wayne Hunter, but Adrian Clark takes the quick cake for worst offensive lineman. And because they wouldn't give Pete Kendall $1 million, they ended up having to spend $40 million to bring Alan Faneca in that offseason. But Pete Kendall definitely a very solid guy at left guard. So. Who was your second team left guard? I'm interested in this.
James Carpenter. I thought he was solid for the Jets. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good sign. That was one of the few good McCagnon moves. The Jets got him. He was one of those guys who was better on his second contract than he was his first contract because he was a first round pick in Seattle and was kind of a disappointment there. Then the Jets signed him in 2015. He ended up being a very solid player for them over the next couple of years. Okay, let's move on to center. So center is interesting because we know the two guys who are going to be our picks. The question is, which order do they go in? And I think of these two guys, there's one guy who was a better player, but he's not the guy. I had the other guy as the first team, as my first teamer, and I'll explain that in a bit. But you can start. Who was your first team center?
I was Kevin Mawai. He was. To me, he was the best center in football for almost every year he was with the Jets. He was. He set the standard at the position in a way that Mangold did not. Mangold was outstanding. There's nothing wrong with Mangold, but to me, Mawai was just an incredible player, and he was there a long time too, not just a couple of years. So yeah, I went with Kevin Mawai.
So I went with Mangold as my first teamer, and what I was saying earlier, I think Mawai had the better career, but what I also factored into this is that some of Mawai's great seasons were in the 90s, and some of his great seasons came after he left the Jets because he went on to have a nice stretch with the Tennessee Titans. And I looked at this, and I think Mawai's peak was better. I mean, he was a center you could pull on run plays. I mean, it was unbelievable how athletic he was. Just Mawai's Mangold's longevity. He was with the Jets for 11 years, and the last year he was kind of banged up, but he was just a model of consistency. He barely ever missed a game. Guy who just a great Jet, a guy who belongs in the Ring of Honor. I mean, I think Mawai's a Hall of Famer. Mangold's a Ring of Honor player, but it's also crazy to think about when the Jets signed Mawai in '98. Mawai lasted until 2005. The Jets drafted Mangold the next year. I mean, the Jets had close to 2 decades where they had great center play. Just these two incredible players. But I went with Mangold not because I think he's a better player, but because I think his contribution to the Jets was longer. So I think for me, it's always like a combination of how good were you at your peak versus the longevity. And while Mawai's peak was better, Mangold just had such longevity that I went with him as my first teamer.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with either one of these guys. The Jets have very few positions where they're great at over the years, and center is one of them. The Jets have been an incredible run at center. So yeah, those two guys were terrific.
Yeah, so and Mawai was my second teamer. I'm guessing Mangold was also your second teamer.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll now move on to right guard, and I think the first team choice is kind of obvious. Brandon Moore, very interesting story. Brandon Moore was a guy who was a defensive lineman in college, and the Jets converted him to offensive line. He ended up being a stalwart at the right guard position.
Yeah, and he was just really solid in those lines for a very long time. And he finally got a Pro Bowl nod at the very end of his career, but I thought he maybe deserved more than that.
Yeah, and he's unfortunately kind of lives in infamy because it was in the butt fumble. It was Brandon Moore's butt that Mark Sanchez slid into, and during that play, like Chris Collinsworth gave some of the worst analysis I've ever heard. He made it sound like Vince Wilfork like shoved through Brandon Moore into Mark Sanchez when Moore actually did a pretty good job blocking on that play. And it was just. It was kind of frustrating because, as you mentioned, like at the end of his career, he finally got a Pro Bowl nod. But during his career, like there were all these years where like he was playing really well, and like one of the biggest like talking points around the Jets year after year after year was like why is nobody paying attention to how good Brandon Moore is?
Yes, it's surprised me that it took that long to get, but I was glad he got it at the end of his career.
Okay, so my second teamer, there were a couple of guys I was between on second team, and this one. I don't know if people are going to love this because of there are durability issues here, but I ended up going with Elijah Vera Tucker. And maybe this is just recency bias. Like sometimes I worry a little bit like maybe I'm just going for like the most recent guy who's freshest in my mind. But with AVT, the question's always been, can he stay on the field? And I think last year he finally was able to stay on the field. I think he's a good pass blocker. I think he's a good run blocker. So there were a couple other guys I considered. Who did you go with?
Randy Thomas. I thought he was terrific with the Jets, but not for long. But he's one of the many Jets in this list that. Why didn't we re-sign these guys? Why don't we keep the? I mean, there was
Terry Bradway era again. Terry Bradway
over and over again. These guys are good players, and we just let them go. I don't understand it.
Randy Thomas was another guy I considered. To a lesser extent, I considered Willie Colon, who had a couple of good years with the Jets. For me, it was between AVT and Thomas. And part of me worries this is just recency bias, where like maybe Thomas was a little bit better. But again, we covered all our bases, so that's a real positive. Okay, right tackle. Who was your first teamer?
Boy, there was very little to choose from here, but I took Kareem McKenzie. I thought he was terrific. And another guy, it's one after another. These guys don't get it. We just didn't keep our good players.
It was all Terry Bradway. Like when I was going through my list, I'm like, this is a guy Bradway let go. This is a guy Bradway let go. Yeah, Kareem McKenzie was a solid player. So my first teamer was Damian Woody, who I thought was an excellent. And Damian Woody had a really interesting career path because he started with New England as a center, then went to Detroit, became a guard. Then went to the Jets and became it's very rare you see a guy move from the inside out on the offensive line. He was a guy who was absolutely rock solid and a big part of those early Rex teams when the Jets had an absolutely dominant offensive line up front. In fact, I think my first team was actually the Jets 2009 offensive line when they went to the AFC Championship game. Kareem McKenzie was my second choice, was my second teamer. And, I really couldn't come up with anybody other than that. But yeah, Kareem McKenzie, they let him go in free agency after 2004. He went to the Giants and won the Super Bowl. The guy was very solid. Who was your second teamer?
It was Damian Woody. I was very close with those two. It was a coin toss.
Yeah, it's funny because like there are some where you're picking like running back where I'm picking between like four guys for two slots. And then there's the ones like center and right tackle where it's clearly these two guys. It's just a question of which of the two is it? That's all for today's episode. Thanks again to my friend MacGregor Wells for joining me. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube, or a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source. Hope you enjoy your Monday and tune in tomorrow. MacGregor and I will be back to conclude our all Jets quarter century team. We'll focus on defense and special teams. Can't wait to chat with you then.